In March 1943, the fate of hundreds of downed Allied pilots rested not on a trained spy, but on a 61-year-old seamstress carrying a woven basket. It was the second day of March 1943 in Marseille, France. The brittle sound of a coded transmission broke the silence in a modest apartment located 400 kilometers away in Toulouse. The message contained just 3 words, yet they signaled a disaster of unimaginable scale. Pat has fallen. Albert Garrick, the highly respected Belgian physician known by his code name, Pat O'Leary, was already enduring the brutal silence of a Gestapo interrogation room. His face was distorted, having already borne the weight of the initial, savage questioning. Below him, 47 other dedicated members of the resistance waited in the damp basement cells, facing an equally terrifying fate. The largest, most complex airman escape conduit operating in occupied French territory had been utterly destroyed. Over 600 airmen had found safety through its channels, but now, everything was gone, wiped out in less than 72 hours. What the German secret police could not fathom was that the elderly woman who silently read that catastrophic telegram in Toulouse, holding a cigarette elegantly in an ivory holder while a cat purred softly near her feet, was about to launch an operation they considered absolutely impossible. At this precise moment, 127 Allied flyers were concealed in barns, dark attics, and forgotten cellars scattered across the southern regions of France. Without the O'Leary organization operational, they were stranded deep behind enemy lines. The Nazi patrols were tightening their grip. Every 60 minutes that passed, the perilous knot tightened further around their necks. We must understand the immense stakes involved. Training a single 10-man crew for a B-17 Flying Fortress required a massive investment, $243,700, and 3 full months of intensive preparation for each individual crew member back in 1943. When a heavy bomber was shot down over France, the Allies lost more than just a $238,320 aircraft. They lost 10 highly specialized professionals, representing a minimum of $150,000 in dedicated training costs and 3 years of irreplaceable combat expertise. In 1943, the casualty rate for Allied bomber personnel soared above 44%. Fewer than 25% of crews managed to survive their obligatory 25 mission tours. The high-altitude strategic bombing campaign was slowly but surely draining the Western Allies of their most valuable asset, experienced manpower. The woman in Toulouse, Marie-Louise Dissard, understood these grim statistics implicitly. She also recognized that by the time the sun rose, the Gestapo would have extracted every address, every safe house location, and every crucial contact name from Pat O'Leary's broken body. She had maybe 48 hours, perhaps less, before the hunters inevitably arrived for her. Marie-Louise Dissard was 61 years old. Her profession was running a tiny dressmaking boutique. She possessed zero military background, no weapons proficiency, and no security detail. The French local authorities actually maintained a file, concluding she was merely mentally unstable. Yet, concealed within her simple handbag were expertly forged identification papers, 50,000 francs in British intelligence funds, and the precise addresses of 18 men sought by every German soldier in the region. What she, or anyone else, could not possibly have known then was that this quiet dressmaker, nervously drawing on her cigarette in her apartment, would personally save more Allied personnel than entire infantry divisions, pioneer an evasion line that would ultimately rescue over 700 airmen, and establish the fundamental template that led to the escape of 7,000 total air crew from German-occupied Europe. But before any of that could happen, she had to execute a plan that was, by all accounts, clinically insane. Let's quickly rewind 6 months to grasp the gravity of the crisis facing Allied planners in late 1942. The coordinated strategic bombing effort across Nazi-held Europe was hemorrhaging trained personnel at an unsustainable rate. Every single week, dozens of American and British bombers plummeted from the sky above France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. The crews deployed their parachutes into intensely hostile environments, wearing flight uniforms that served as screaming indicators of their identity. They often spoke no local language. They had absolutely no training on where to seek refuge. Within mere hours, the majority were captured. The resulting statistics were soul-crushing. Of the bomber crews shot down over occupied French territory in 1942, less than 5% successfully avoided capture. The remainder spent the duration of the war in brutal Nazi prisoner camps, or worse. For the young air crews flying these dangerous missions, it felt like signing a death warrant with unnecessary extra steps. The expert consensus emanating from the highest levels of Allied command was stark. We cannot afford to lose these highly valuable men, but there appears to be nothing effective we can deploy once they land in enemy territory. MI9, the specialized British intelligence unit tasked with establishing escape and evasion routes, attempted every possible strategy. They authorized the printing of secret silk maps hidden inside playing cards. They distributed micro-compasses cleverly concealed within uniform buttons. They broadcast coded instructions via the BBC World Service. None of it proved sufficient. Downed airmen still desperately required one crucial asset that intelligence agents in London could not remotely supply: trustworthy individuals on the ground willing to voluntarily risk their lives and their family's safety. This vacuum led to the creation of the Pat O'Leary Network. Named after Garrick operational alias, this underground lifeline stretched for over 1,000 kilometers of occupied land, running from Brussels all the way to the Spanish border. It was a complex operation relying on a vast network of personnel, over 1,000 kilometers of secure safe houses, dedicated guides, professional document forgers, sympathetic train conductors, and courageous farmers. At its peak capacity, the O'Leary network was efficiently processing 30 to 40 Allied evaders every month, moving them along a sophisticated, clandestine railroad. But the operation carried a fundamental, critical flaw that British intelligence understood but never fully rectified. The entire edifice rested upon the operational security of a single human being. If Pat O'Leary fell into enemy hands, the whole thing would instantly collapse. Back in London, MI9 officer Harry Neve constantly paced his small office, chain-smoking cigarettes out of sheer anxiety. "We are constructing the entirety of our southern escape corridor around a monolithic single point of failure," he confided to his colleagues. "It's operationally brilliant, but utterly unsustainable in the long term." Then, in a catastrophic moment, the worst-case scenario materialized. It wasn't due to brilliant counterintelligence by the Germans, but through a devastating act of treason from within the network itself. Harold Cole, a British sergeant whom MI9 officer James Langley would later brand as an utter traitor who sold out his nation to the highest bidder, meticulously betrayed the entire O'Leary structure to the Gestapo for cash. In the tumultuous 48-hour window commencing on March 2nd, 1943, the Germans systematically rolled up the entire organization. Garrick, all known safe houses, key guides, and pivotal train operators, all were arrested. The strategic impact was instantaneous and crippling. Between the months of March and April 1943, the successful evasion rate for Allied airmen plummeted to almost zero. Dozens of highly specialized pilots and bombardiers sat trapped in rural French farmhouses with zero possibility of exit, desperately awaiting a network that had ceased to exist. In London, Neve received the devastating summary reports. The Pat O'Leary line had been responsible for successfully helping over 600 men reach safety in Britain. Now, there was absolutely nothing left. "We are completely back to square one," he recorded glumly in his personal diary. "Every single airman who goes down over France now is heading straight into a POW camp." The challenge seemed genuinely insurmountable. How could anyone possibly run an effective evasion network remotely from London? You needed someone with deep, intimate local knowledge, extensive existing contacts within the community, and the impeccable operational security required to deter swift German infiltration. You needed someone the Gestapo did not already know. You needed someone they would genuinely never suspect. In Toulouse, Marie-Louise Dissard deliberately read the telegram announcing Pat's arrest one final time. She then tossed the paper into the fireplace, calmly picked up her customary ivory cigarette holder, and grabbed her familiar shopping basket. She had 127 terrified Allied airmen who urgently needed saving. and the Gestapo genuinely believed she was nothing more than an eccentric, garrulous old woman. Marie-Louise Dissard was the complete antithesis of what a spy was supposed to embody. Born on November 6, 1881, in Cahors, she was 61 years old in 1943, an age when most women focused on domestic duties and spending time with grandchildren, certainly not on conducting clandestine guerrilla operations. She possessed zero military experience, received no formal intelligence training, and held no combat background whatsoever. Her sole professional qualifications were operating a small women's dressmaking boutique on Rue de la Paume in Toulouse and serving as a low-level secretary for the city government. She was tiny, standing barely 5 feet tall, famously loud, and fiercely opinionated. She spoke incessantly, habitually chain-smoked cigarettes through her dramatic ivory holder, and carried a perpetually purring cat named Muff along with her almost everywhere she went. The local French police maintained a detailed file on her that explicitly concluded she suffered from mental imbalance, an assessment she actively encouraged because it made her appear utterly harmless. But what the police file utterly failed to capture was her profound insight. Marie-Louise Dissard understood something fundamental about life in occupied France that eluded sophisticated military strategists in London. This critical realization dawned in July 1942 when a man named Paul Ullman quietly knocked on her door. Ullman was a key contact for the O'Leary network and was actively hiding English flyers shot down during recent bombing raids. "Mademoiselle Dissard," he whispered urgently, "I desperately need your immediate help." She stood there, looking at this man, who was requesting she commit outright treason against the German occupiers, an offense punishable by certain torture and immediate execution. She then glanced around at her small, quiet dress shop, her modest apartment, and her previously tranquil life. "How many airmen require shelter?" she calmly asked. "Right now, 6, Ullman replied, "but there will undoubtedly be many more soon." That night, Marie-Louise Dissard made a decisive choice that would ultimately preserve hundreds of human lives. It wasn't primarily because she was physically brave, although she certainly was. It wasn't because she possessed inherent espionage skills, although she proved surprisingly capable. It was because she grasped a core truth that escaped both Allied intelligence and the Gestapo. Nobody pays attention to the elderly woman carrying a grocery basket. She began cautiously, renting a small suburban villa in Toulouse to temporarily house the evaders, cooking necessary meals for imprisoned resistance workers, and carefully cultivating essential relationships with train conductors, sympathetic cafe owners, and rural farmers along the prospective escape routes. By December 1942, she was efficiently managing the entire Toulouse regional section of the O'Leary Line, arranging secure safe houses, providing crucial forged documents, and personally escorting airmen on crowded trains right beneath the noses of unsuspecting German soldiers. Her chosen code name was Françoise. Her cover story was absolutely flawless, an eccentric, harmless shopkeeper making her daily rounds, chatting loudly with nearby neighbors, procuring black market foodstuffs, and visiting friends. The distinctive shopping basket she always carried could contain literally anything: large amounts of francs intended for bribing train operators, fresh sets of fake identity papers, crucial coded messages, replacement civilian clothing for the airmen, or extra food rations. She seemed to require almost no sleep, one resistance member later recalled. She ran purely on strong black coffee and endless cigarettes. She might appear at 3 a.m. to relocate a downed airman, only to be back running her dress shop by 9 a.m., as if the night's peril had never occurred. The defining moment of her total commitment arrived on that March night in 1943 when the telegram announced Pat's capture. Most people in her position would have immediately fled, vanished into hiding, or simply saved themselves. Marie-Louise Dissard chose the opposite course of action. She grabbed her functional shopping basket, donned her most outlandish and ridiculous feathered hat, and deliberately walked straight toward Gestapo regional headquarters to arrange the rental of a new safe house, located directly in the adjacent building. The crazy old lady was about to construct the most audacious, successful escape network in the entire history of World War II. Marie-Louise Dissard's operational center was a cramped, slightly dingy apartment at 40 Rue de la Paume, literally situated in the architectural shadow of the Gestapo headquarters in Toulouse. This was not recklessness. It was pure, calculated strategic brilliance. They will never think to look for me where they themselves sleep, she calmly explained to her deputy, Jeannie. I am hiding in plain sight, completely visible. Her initial, crude prototype of the network was astonishingly simple and effective. She would become precisely what the Germans expected, an annoying, slightly dotty older woman, and then weaponize their own deeply ingrained assumptions and stereotypes against them. The new system functioned as follows. Downed airmen would be initially collected by local farmers and resistance contacts in remote rural areas. They would send coded messages relaying the location of the evaders to Françoise in Toulouse. She would then procure train tickets, supply sophisticated false documents identifying the airmen as harmless French workers, and personally escort them on the trains from the northern cities down to Toulouse. Visualize this scene. A 61-year-old woman wearing an absurdly feathered hat, chattering incessantly and loudly in rapid French, fussing dramatically with her heavy shopping basket, accompanied by a young nephew, who speaks absolutely no French and is clearly shaking with fear. German soldiers encountered this exact scene every single day on trains traversing occupied France. An elderly, eccentric aunt escorting a shy, awkward young relative. They simply waved them through checkpoints without the slightest hesitation or second glance. The network's first major test arrived in April 1943, only a few weeks following Pat's arrest. 8 American airmen were concealed within a farmhouse near Bergerac, approximately 120 kilometers from Toulouse. The Gestapo had initiated rigorous door-to-door searches across the area. Time was rapidly running out. Marie-Louise executed 3 separate, high-risk train journeys in 4 days. During each trip, she personally escorted 2 or 3 nephews past rigid German checkpoints, maintaining a non-stop barrage of loud complaints about rationing, poor service, and discussions of fabric patterns. The Germans found her ceaseless talking so incredibly irritating that they typically rushed her through the inspections just to make her leave their sight quickly. All 8 airmen reached Toulouse safely. From there, she immediately arranged their further passage south toward Perpignan and subsequently across the treacherous Pyrenees Mountains into neutral Spain. The initial reaction from other established resistance operatives was immediate and fiercely critical. That is outright suicide. You're going to get everyone executed, one veteran Illyria operative vehemently told her. You are far too visible, too loud, too memorable. Exactly, she coolly replied, exhaling a plume of cigarette smoke through her ivory holder. They vividly remember the annoying old woman with the cat. They do not, however, remember the specific faces of the young men I am successfully moving. Another resistance leader was far more direct in his criticism. This is completely unauthorized. MI9 has strict, established protocols. You cannot simply create your own network without official authorization from London. Marie-Louise looked at him with icy coldness. Then 127 Allied airmen will perish while we sit here, waiting for permission for bureaucrats who are not currently being hunted by the Gestapo. She transmitted one concise message back to London via a trusted Swiss intermediary. Asterisk, Pat has fallen. François has risen. Send money. Asterisk. The British vice-consul stationed in Switzerland, Victor Farrell, read her extraordinary message and immediately grasped the critical situation. An elderly French shopkeeper was about to accomplish what the entire sophisticated British intelligence establishment had declared utterly impossible: rebuilding a collapsed escape network entirely from scratch, operating directly under the intense pressure of active Gestapo surveillance, and relying on zero formal military support. Farrell promptly approved emergency funding, $200 to $300 per airman, successfully delivered to Spain. The Françoise Line was officially operational, and the Gestapo still operated under the assumption she was just a harmless, annoying old woman who talked far too much. May 1943. A secure intelligence facility located just outside London. Erin Eve, the MI9 officer responsible for overseeing all escape lines, meticulously reads the latest intelligence report filtering in from Switzerland with mounting, absolute disbelief. An entirely unauthorized evasion network is operating deep inside Toulouse, run solely by a 61-year-old woman. She has no military background, and she is moving downed airmen past Gestapo checkpoints by pretending they are nephews on shopping trips. This is utter madness, Neve exclaimed. She will be compromised and captured within weeks. His close colleague, Jimmy Langley, leaned over to examine the report. The Swiss report says she has already successfully moved 34 airmen since Pat was captured in just 6 weeks. That is mathematically impossible. That is precisely what I stated, Neve responded. But the airmen are genuinely arriving safely in Gibraltar. They are verified survivors. The room immediately erupted into fierce debate. Half the assembled officers vehemently argued for immediately shutting down the Françoise Line. She is severely compromising established operational security. She is placing the entire tenuous Southern network at enormous risk. We require highly trained professionals, not amateur seamstresses attempting to play at spy games. The other half of the officers recognized an undeniable truth that the statistics could not erase. The Françoise Line was working miraculously. Gentlemen, a senior officer quietly interjected, let me pose a direct question. Since Pat O'Leary's arrest in March, how many airmen have official, authorized MI9 networks successfully evacuated through southern France? A long, heavy silence filled the room. And exactly how many has this dressmaker from Toulouse evacuated? More silence. Precisely, the senior officer concluded. We do not possess the luxury of operational perfectionism. We have valuable bomber crews going down every single day. If this woman can effectively get them home, I personally do not care if she achieves it while wearing a ballet tutu and loudly singing opera. But the decisive confrontation that would ultimately determine the fate of the network occurred not in London conference rooms, but in the crowded streets of Toulouse. August 1943. A young courier working for the Comet Line, another major established escape network operating out of Belgium, arrives at Marie-Louise's unassuming apartment. He had been dispatched specifically to assess the operational viability and security protocols of the Françoise Line. The young courier, a highly trained intelligence operative, reviewed her entire operation with increasing professional horror. Safe houses maintained with laughably minimal security measures, fake identification documents produced by visibly amateur forgers, zero use of established dead drops, no formal coded communications, and no adherence to standard operational protocols. And this 61-year-old woman was personally escorting evaders on trains while chain-smoking and carrying a perpetually present cat. Mademoiselle Dissard, he began cautiously. With all due respect, this entire operation is highly unconventional. You mean recklessly dangerous and utterly stupid? She immediately countered. I certainly did not state that, he stammered. But you are emphatically thinking it, she smiled thinly, lighting another cigarette with purpose. Tell me, how many airmen has the established Comet Line moved through Toulouse since March? That figure is not 0. The answer is 0, she continued, not waiting for a reply, because all of you are waiting for the proper, perfectly secure protocols while my men slowly rot in drafty attics. Your methods will inevitably get people executed, the courier insisted. My methods, she stated firmly, are successfully getting people home. The argument rapidly escalated. The courier insisted that she was flagrantly violating every single rule governing clandestine operations. She countered that she was intentionally violating expectations, which was precisely why her system worked flawlessly. He demanded that she immediately submit to London's strict oversight. She flatly refused. Finally, he delivered the ultimate threat. If you fail to submit to proper intelligence protocols, MI9 will immediately cut all your funding. Marie-Louise Dissard stared down at this earnest young man, half her age, attempting to intimidate her. Then she offered a cold, dispassionate smile, the kind that never reached her eyes. Go right ahead, she challenged him. Cut my funding. I will sell off my dresses. I will utilize my own money. I will stand begging on street corners if necessary. But those airmen are going home, with or without London's condescending permission. The courier returned to his superiors, fully anticipating that they would move to shut down the amateur operation. Instead, Marie-Louise made a crucial decision that ultimately saved hundreds of lives. He approved full, immediate funding for the Françoise Line, and granted Marie-Louise absolute operational independence. His reasoning was simple yet profoundly brilliant. Conventional tradecraft had failed miserably. Harold Cole had successfully infiltrated and destroyed the O'Leary Line precisely because it followed conventional protocols. This woman, Neve realized, was succeeding specifically because she shattered every established rule. The Gestapo simply did not possess the training or the mindset to hunt a target that refused to operate like a typical spy. He added one final, crucial directive. And for the love of God, do not attempt to tell her how to execute her job. She clearly understands this better than we do. The necessary funding began to flow immediately. The Françoise Line rapidly expanded. By September 1943, Marie-Louise commanded a network comprising over 100 dedicated helpers scattered across southern France. Trustworthy train conductors, brave farmers, local doctors, sympathetic cafe owners, Catholic nuns, and even a few covertly sympathetic policemen. She continued her daily shopping trips, moving evaders past German soldiers who consistently perceived nothing more than an annoying, harmless old woman carrying a basket. The Gestapo remained utterly oblivious that the elderly seamstress residing adjacent to their headquarters was masterminding the single, most effective evasion network operating in occupied France. If you are finding this story of unbelievable resilience and audacity incredible, stick around to see the tactical details that followed. If you've been enjoying this deep dive into hidden history, please hit that like button to help this video reach more curious minds, and make sure you subscribe to the Winds of Thought channel for more stories of forgotten heroes. The hard data collected between 1943 and 1944 tells an extraordinary, triumphant story. Between the collapse in March 1943 and the liberation in August 1944, the Françoise Line successfully evacuated over 250 Allied airmen from occupied French territory into secure Spain. Combined with her earlier, pivotal work on the O'Leary Line, Marie-Louise Dissard personally facilitated the rescue of more than 700 Allied air crews. But sheer numbers cannot adequately capture the actual, paralyzing tension inherent in those journeys, on those crowded trains, inside those tenuous safe houses, and across those icy Pyrenees peaks. Let's track one successful mission in precise detail. March 5, 1944. A P-51 Mustang fighter pilot named Chuck Yeager is violently shot down over France during an escort mission supporting a bomber raid. He deploys his parachute and lands in a remote field near the small village of Bazas-sur-l'Adour. Within minutes, local French farmers conceal him inside a hay barn. Within 24 hours, the vital word reaches François, American pilot, injured, requires urgent extraction. Marie-Louise personally managed his case. She quickly arranged a sequence of safe houses, provided crucial civilian attire, and created a fake identity profile for him. Charles Lamer, deaf-mute textile worker. The deaf-mute cover was a brilliant touch. It perfectly explained why the young man could not possibly speak a word of French. On March 8th, Marie-Louise met Yeager at a designated farmhouse just outside Toulouse. He was only 21 years old, understandably terrified, and utterly bewildered as to why this tiny, elderly woman carrying a small cat was his only hope for escape. "Do exactly and precisely as I instruct," she told him in heavily accented, broken English. "On the train, you are legally my nephew. You are totally deaf. You cannot hear. You cannot utter sound. If German soldiers try to ask you questions, I will answer all of them. You simply stare at the floor and maintain a vacant, stupid expression. Do you fully comprehend?" Yeager nodded tensely. They boarded the southbound train to Toulouse. The railway car was uncomfortably packed with German soldiers returning for short leave. Marie-Louise positioned herself directly beside Yeager, launching into a characteristic loud monologue about chronic fabric shortages and her incessant complaints regarding rationing inconveniences. She was so deliberately annoying that the German soldiers actively avoided making eye contact with her. Upon arrival in Toulouse, they were stopped at a military checkpoint. A Gestapo officer meticulously began examining papers. Marie-Louise launched into a dramatic, emotional monologue about her poor nephew who had lost his hearing tragically in a factory accident. She was so theatrically over the top that the Gestapo officer impatiently stamped their documents, simply to make her cease talking and leave quickly. Jaeger later wrote about the encounter. This little old lady was either the bravest human being I ever had the privilege to meet, or she was certifiably insane. Maybe she was both. From Toulouse, François passed Jaeger safely to experienced mountain guides who led him across the treacherous Pyrenees range. He successfully reached neutral Spain on March 30th, 1944. By April, he was safely back in England. By October, he was again flying combat missions. Chuck Yeager, the young pilot saved by the loud seamstress, would famously go on to become the first human pilot to officially break the sound barrier. But on that tense day in March 1944, his survival rested entirely in the hands of a 62-year-old French dressmaker with nothing but a simple shopping basket. The perspective of the enemy tragically reveals just how utterly invisible the Françoise Line remained to German intelligence operations. A Gestapo internal report dated December 1943, recovered only after the war's conclusion, noted, continued escapes of Allied airmen through Toulouse sector. Source unknown. Suspect possible communist network operating from rural areas. Recommend increased surveillance of suspected leftist sympathizers. They were looking in the complete and total opposite direction. The source of their frustration was residing directly next door to their headquarters, walking right past their offices on a daily basis with a basket perpetually full of illegal contraband. Another recovered Gestapo memo from March 1944 states, local informants report elderly woman frequently observed escorting young men on trains to Perpignan. Investigation reveals subject is Marie-Louise Dissard, age 62, dressmaker, known to be mentally unstable. Assessment, harmless. No operational action required. That exact harmless woman successfully moved 43 Allied airmen right past German checkpoints during the 3-month period covered by that single report. The kill ratios, or rather, the life ratios, become staggering when we grasp the strategic significance of Marie-Louise's work. Each B-17 crew consisted of 10 highly trained technical specialists: pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier, flight engineer, radio operator, and 4 dedicated gunners. Total training cost, $15,000 per man, requiring 3 months minimum. Many crews had survived over 20 combat missions, representing irreplaceable, hard-earned combat experience. When a bomber went down over France without the existence of the escape lines, the entire crew was definitively lost, either captured or killed. The Allies were then forced to train entirely replacement crews from zero experience. 10 new men, $150,000, 3 months of training time, and 0 combat experience. When a bomber was lost with the evasion lines actively operating, the strategic outcome shifted entirely. 30 to 40% of the crew often survived the shoot-down and evaded immediate capture. Of those initial survivors, the Françoise Line and other networks successfully returned approximately 60 to 70% to Allied control. These highly experienced men could then brief intelligence officers extensively on German defenses. They could resume combat operations quickly after necessary rest, and their vital combat experience was retained. Consider the arithmetic. For every 10 bombers shot down over Françoise Line territory, Marie-Louise's network potentially saved 20 to 25 trained air crew members who returned to fly combat operations. That is the strategic equivalent of 2 to 3 complete bomber crews saved for every 10 lost. This represented a critical force multiplier that Allied commanders desperately required to sustain the bombing effort. American bomber crews were fully aware of the existence of the escape lines, though they were given no operational details. They refer to them simply as the Freedom Trails. Before flying missions over France, squadron commanders would offer this brief counsel. If you go down, attempt to reach a nearby village. The local people may be able to assist. We have people there who can help. One B-17 pilot, Lieutenant James Hall, shot down in September 1943, provided this powerful testimony after the war. We bailed out over a small farming village. I fully expected to be captured within a few hours. Instead, a farmer concealed us in his barn. 3 days later, a tiny, elderly French woman arrived. She must have been 60 or 70 years old. She possessed false identity papers, food, and civilian clothing. She personally escorted my bombardier and myself onto a train, right past German soldiers. She sat there, smoking cigarettes and chattering loudly in French, while I sat praying silently that the Germans wouldn't ask me anything at all. She successfully got us to Spain. Because of her, we came home. Because of her, I flew 12 more combat missions. Because of her, my crew was eventually reunited. I only learned after the war that her name was Françoise. I never had the chance to properly thank her. By the summer of 1944, the incredible reputation of the Françoise Line had spread widely through Allied bomber squadrons. Downed airmen began deliberately trying to reach the Toulouse sector, knowing that if they could make initial contact with Françoise's network, their odds of returning home jumped from less than 5% to well over 60%. But even the most audacious plans face eventual peril. The Gestapo was inexorably tightening their surveillance. January 1944. One of Marie-Louise's dedicated guides is apprehended in Perpignan. In his seized notebook, investigators find a crucial address in Toulouse, Marie-Louise's apartment. She immediately evacuates 9 fugitives in less than 24 hours, moving them to prearranged new safe houses. Then, she vanishes into the underground, living secretly in cold attics and damp basements, relocating every few nights. The Gestapo brutally searches her apartment. They missed capturing her by approximately 2 hours. For 6 incredibly tense months, Marie-Louise Dissard successfully ran the entire Françoise Line while she was actively hunted by the Gestapo's most ruthless agents. She continued escorting airmen on trains, now operating under heavy disguise. She successfully moved evaders in broad daylight past soldiers carrying her photograph, relying solely on extreme audacity and her ever-present shopping basket. She violated expectations. That is exactly why it worked. One of her absolute final, high-stakes missions occurred in July 1944, involving moving 8 American airmen from Toulouse south to Perpignan, a 200-kilometer journey through the most heavily patrolled region of southern France. She succeeded completely. All 8 men reached secure Spanish territory. 2 weeks later, Allied forces successfully landed in southern France. The devastating German occupation was finally collapsing. Marie-Louise Dissard, the seemingly harmless old lady with the shopping basket, had survived against all conceivable odds. She had won her private war. August 1944. Toulouse is officially liberated. Marie-Louise Dissard emerges from her extensive hiding to find the entire city erupting in celebration. Resistance fighters are being hailed universally as heroes. American soldiers march triumphantly through the streets to cheering, ecstatic crowds. Everyone seeks to honor the brave individuals who had openly defied the Nazis. Marie-Louise quietly returned to her small, unassuming dress shop on Rue de la Paume. "I simply did what absolutely needed doing," she told one persistent local reporter who finally tracked her down. Any decent person would have done exactly the same. This profound humility would define the remainder of her life. Following the cessation of hostilities, the accolades poured in from across the Western world. France bestowed upon her the prestigious Legion of Honor and the Croix de Guerre. The United Kingdom granted her the George Medal, one of their highest civilian honors for bravery. The United States officially presented her with the Medal of Freedom with gold palm. Belgium also honored her remarkable contributions. At one particular post-war ceremony, an American general attempted to present her with the Medal of Freedom in front of the assembled press corps. Marie-Louise accepted the medal, then quietly but firmly stated, "This great honor truly belongs to the wonderful helpers I have recommended for recognition. They risked absolutely everything. I merely coordinated the effort." She systematically refused the majority of interview requests and actively avoided all publicity. When grateful American airmen attempted to locate her personally after the war to express their profound thanks, she made herself deliberately difficult to find. "They were simply performing their duty," she remarked. "I was merely performing mine." One remarkable post-war quote perfectly captures her defining attitude. When asked by a French journalist in 1946 whether she considered herself a hero, Marie-Louise replied, Heroes are the young men who courageously flew those heavy bombers, knowing that most would not survive 25 missions. Heroes are the humble farmers who concealed airmen, fully knowing the penalty was immediate execution. Heroes are the tireless mountain guides who crossed the Pyrenees during brutal winter storms. I merely walked, annoying Germans on trains. Any loud old woman could have achieved that task. These 7,000 men represented roughly $15 million in training costs in 1943 currency, over 500,000 hours of collective combat experience, and possessed incalculable strategic value to the critical Allied bombing campaign. Many returned to fly dozens of additional missions. Their detailed intelligence briefings proved instrumental in refining bombing tactics and significantly reducing overall losses. The enduring, modern legacy of the Françoise Line stretches far beyond World War II history. Marie-Louise Dissard ingeniously pioneered tactical methods that are still formally studied by contemporary intelligence services today, using apparent operational vulnerabilities, such as age, gender, or eccentricity, as distinct operational advantages, hiding deliberately in plain sight, often immediately adjacent to the enemy's main headquarters, effectively weaponizing enemy assumptions and stereotypes, and successfully constructing robust networks based on unwavering trust rather than relying solely on formal, brittle hierarchy. She proved the necessity of operating outside conventional intelligence protocols when the immediate need was paramount. In Toulouse today, the professional high school lycée professional Marie-Louise Dissard François educates students about the critical virtues of resistance, resilience, and resourceful ingenuity. A city street now proudly bears her name. A plaque marks the former location of her small dress shop at 40 Rue de la Paume. Marie-Louise Dissard died peacefully in July 1957 at the age of 75. She never married, never sought fleeting fame, and never published a memoir detailing her heroics. Most of the 700 airmen whose lives she saved never learned her true name, knowing her only by her enduring code name, François. The final, compelling word belongs to Harry Neve, the MI9 officer who ultimately risked his career to approve her crucial funding. In his post-war memoir, he wrote, "History will undoubtedly remember the generals, the distinguished pilots, and the professional soldiers. But this war was truly won by people exactly like Marie-Louise Dissard, ordinary individuals who performed acts of extraordinary courage simply because someone had to step forward." She possessed zero formal training, no weapons, and minimal logistical support, just an ordinary shopping basket, an ivory cigarette holder, and the absolute, burning conviction that leaving those young men to die or rot in Nazi prisons was fundamentally unacceptable. The Gestapo believed she was nothing more than a harmless, eccentric old woman. She was, in reality, one of the most effective and strategically vital resistance operators of the entire war. May we all possess her unique courage when duty calls. The powerful moral lesson is simple, yet deeply profound. The most dangerous enemy is not always the one who appears overtly threatening. Sometimes, it is the 61-year-old seamstress carrying a simple shopping basket, the one everyone universally underestimated because the Nazis never saw her true power coming.